I'm just gonna thank you for this opportunity to share. I had uh, two very good conversations with you, Graham, and I want to thank you again for your contribution to a session that we had on November 30 by way of that video that shared just a brief overview of ICOBC, and certainly the conversation with Rolf and with Holly in terms of just furthering the possibilities of partnership. So what I want to do is quickly today just share on Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, the organization, but looking at some of the issues nationally, and then certainly I want to table some ideas for collaboration. All righty, good. So we are an agency of the Ministry of Education and Youth in Jamaica, established as a higher education regulator. And these three words capture in essence of what we do. So we regulate institutions and the qualifications that they award. And we do this regulation primarily by registration. So we inspect institutions and we move towards giving them certificates of registration, essentially allowing them to operate. However, we are entering the space after the fact, that is to say, after many of them have begun their operations, begun their programs of offerings and their awards. Bear in mind that higher education, tertiary education, technical vocational education and training at the tertiary level, have decades and over centuries, literally in Jamaica's case, and then certainly with respect to your higher education systems where you are. So we are after the fact, and so we are looking to regulate within that context, and then development in terms of our activities to guide and support webinars, sessions, and so on. These dates are important. In 2002, what I'm speaking about here is how we came to be established. In 2002, the government of the day instituted a education sector transformation review. They established a task force to look at the education sector, to review its outcomes, and to make recommendations on the way ahead. The report was published in 2004, and that report, with respect to the tertiary education or higher education level, mandated the development of two entities. One would be the regulator, and the other would be the quote-unquote quality assurance body, but we're talking about primarily accreditation activities. The regulator would act as gatekeeper, regulating the sector, research, to be the vehicle for funding, to establish a strategic plan, to guide the internationalization of the sector, some of those basic mandates, and also to develop a national qualifications framework. Coming out of that report, about 8 years later, we were established. Since that point in time, the agency has been developed in terms of its structure and some basic operational procedures in terms of just moving ahead. In keeping with the report of the education sector review, we should have had legislation. We're still awaiting that, among other actions to implement and give effect to who we are and to establish our agency properly in law. In 2022, just two weeks ago, the report of another commission was launched. This commission was launched by the present Prime Minister in 2020, and he did so against the background of the need to review some of the findings from the earlier report in 2004, looking at the gaps, looking at what had been implemented, what had not been implemented. But it came against a background of serious concerns over the outcomes of Jamaica's education system. And again, the core recommendations of this report again charged the government to establish the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission in law, among other things. So these dates are important. JTEC, the recommendation for the establishment of Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission against the background of unregulated growth. We have heard the terms massification of higher education, the role of the private sector in terms of institutions, just looking at all of that and how that obtained, and whether or not there really should be the need for regulation. I mean, obviously this was the case, but this was a discussion, and as noted, it was after the fact. There was a need for coordinated effort in terms of Jamaica's higher education development and emphasis on research, development, and facilitation of funding. Our system comes out of a British colonial heritage, so those on the panel from that background, Australia, Canada, etc., would know and appreciate some of this in terms of those historic institutions that would be there, some of the newer, younger entities, and then the extent to which there is this tension between both, and some seeing themselves as not in need of regulation, but rather that's for the others. So there was an institutional basis for quality and validation. And then prior to my organization coming on the scene, we had what is called a Joint Board for Teacher Education, which looked at our teachers' colleges. And as I indicated, some of these are almost 2 centuries old. Some of the teachers' colleges that we have in Jamaica, almost 2 centuries old, coming on the scene shortly after emancipation, the end of the slave trade, the development of a new systems, colonial relationships, etc., new internal government. And so the teachers' colleges would literally form the nucleus of our basic higher education system. Then, we had in the 1940s, the establishment of the University College of the West Indies, an arm of the University of London, which became the University of the West Indies. And then the system just grew essentially like that. The first attempt at regulating was through the University Council of Jamaica, which was established to facilitate the award of programs, but it later grew into being the national accrediting body. The Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica again served as a means to generate the delivery of higher education throughout other areas of Jamaica and facilitating access to programs that could not be had, generally speaking, given the limited spaces. And so this is part of our heritage. So Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, recently we have been focusing on developing our systems, our structure, building our people, and engaging our stakeholders. And in this regard, we have, defined, documented all our policies, procedures. We are ISO 9001:2015 certified, and we have invested in people, getting more staff on board, this sort of thing. And then supporting this now is a program of some critical stakeholder engagement. So as I said before, we are Jamaica's regulatory body in formation, and outside of what I've said so far, we're at a critical stage now in developing a national qualification system, which, given the conversation, ICOBC and even this and today's session is vitally important. We have developed a national qualifications framework. It is being operationalized. Supporting this is a qualifications registry. And what will happen is that the qualifications that are placed on the framework would then be located in this registry, which is basically a database. And we want to go further to formalize a credit accumulation and transfer system, particularly for persons without the formal or other TVET type certification. We face a massive problem in Jamaica, as I believe I'd mentioned when we met in November or October, sorry, that surrounds currently 65%, according to 2019 data. The 2019 data is found in our Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions. And our National Statistical Institute goes in the field, does this survey, and then the planning body takes that data, puts a report out. And so it is a significant and extensive survey. And the 2019 data indicates that 65% of the prime working age population, that is to say persons between 24 and 54 years of age, are without certification. Now, generally speaking, that data I have come to refer to persons without higher education certification or without TVET at level of certification at the tertiary level or post-secondary level. But the data reveals a harsher reality in that we're speaking about 65% of the prime working age population who do not have any certification at all. And so this opens up some significant challenges. We have been lagging in terms of just economic growth, development, faces some serious and critical social problems, labor, low productivity, significantly high levels of crime, social violence, and etc. And so, but this doesn't belie the fact of the productivity capacity of our people, because we migrate in droves, and wherever we have been found, in the main, in the certainly beginning in the UK, but England, Canada, USA, etc. We are fairly productive, but it's just the context here and a number of challenges. But I'm saying this basically to say that we proposed to the Minister of Education that we have something akin to this, a national workforce certification program, or human resource development strategy, however you want to put it. But it speaks about how can we deal with this group of persons who are in need of enhancement of their certification, so that their own personal goals and their ability just to get ahead. So the conversation within ICOBC and in the context that I'm hearing has to do essentially with, and this is not to say that you may not have pockets similar to this. I heard Rolf highlight the whole matter of some critical groups like refugees, etc. But they may be the challenges that they may face would be that they have no paper to validate their education and training from the context in which they have migrated, etc., among other things. But the challenges here are significant, go to the fact of an underperforming education system, etc. So how can we redeem the situation now? And so this is where we are at. The report that I just highlighted a couple of slides ago, that was just launched this month, 2 weeks or so ago. In that report, very critical of the education system and its underperformance, and making a host of recommendations to correct this, so that we cease those negative outcomes, transform the sector, and certify more persons at the levels of the school before they leave the school for whatever reason. And so we're not just now talking about certifying or recertifying persons with credentials, in terms of a workforce that skilled, certified already, and needing new credentials to transition to new opportunities. We're talking about some of that here, yes, but primarily we're talking about providing, in many instances, a foundation, including basic literacy, numeracy, and then just to be able to satisfy the needs of the labor market here in Jamaica. And so we are currently meeting with employers, representatives of the trade union, higher education institutions, human capital development organizations, in an attempt to develop and define this strategy in response. As envisioned, we would see a national network of workforce certification centers using our let me go back, using our higher education institutions, training organizations, the workforce, workers association, community groups, and just government locations, all right, to be able to look at these, to be able to utilize quality assured flexible learning pathways. We want to emphasize this: prior learning assessment and recognition, the basic education programs, just to facilitate the certification of these individuals. So this is a major concern at this particular point in time. And we want to look at this life skills and character education, general education, career in terms of the skills or the competencies. And we're talking about persons within the formal sectors as well as those in the informal space, so that we can ensure that they benefit, as well as the required psychosocial support. So it's a major program. We talk about 65% of the prime working age population. You're talking about over 700,000 people. Now, we're not necessarily in the short and medium term looking at dealing with all of that, but we certainly will deal with a pilot, try to expand it, to bring the employers, to bring workforce-based organizations, as I said, the schools, to be able to serve as centers where persons can go in, or we can then go to train and register HR officers, train and register trainers as prior learning assessment persons who can apply it, and then to assess. We can then collaborate in terms of training programs to be able then to award credentials, micro-credentials, just bits and pieces to let them go ahead. And so that is one component. Another has to do with our unattached youth. Again, as I mentioned, we have some challenges with high degrees of crime, social violence, and we want to look at how best we can extend to that. So it's going to be a two-track strategy, looking at the workforce, but then also looking at those unattached, socially disadvantaged groups and communities, so that we can be able to have some strategies that can address the challenges that we face. So for JTech, what we want to do is to look at registering training providers, HR professionals, training and certifying them in the application of prior learning assessment and recognition, looking at training spaces, both virtual and physical, looking at recruiting the workers and getting buy-in from employers to facilitate the training, to facilitate the certification processes, and then just to see how best we can go ahead with this. Yep. Yeah, I think I can basically, yeah, I don't need to go into much of this, because I mean, this would have been stuff I would have said before, but this I want to place on the table, and quite serious about this. I am, me personally at my level, planning to join ICOBC as an individual. I'm not remembering if this is permitted or if you only allow for organization-based membership, but I want to do that if at all possible. I would also want to look at JTech becoming a member. And then I heard, I believe it's Rupert, speaking about accrediting and so on, and looking at that down the road. So I definitely would be interested in looking at that collaboration with ICOBC. Looking at program development support, presentations in terms of some of our sessions, but also, and member in this group here now are members of the executive committee, I believe it's called, is to see if we could have, I heard Graham a couple of sessions ago that and Ralph, that one of the things we certainly could look at is the fact that here in Jamaica, we're in Latin America and Caribbean in terms of that grand regionalization, looking from the United Nations perspective, but to have this sort of messaging concerning workforce development through credentialing, badges, micro-credentials, etc. here. Looking at the possibility of a conference here, well, not here, it would have to be physical, not in this time, it can be virtual, a sort of hybrid, but focusing on this for entities throughout Latin America and Caribbean towards April. And I say April only because this will be before the World Higher Education Conference that's scheduled in May in Spain. But higher education has not necessarily looked or been so open towards the area of credentialing, badging, and so on. The World Bank recently published a study of workforce credentialing, development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Groundbreaking from my perspective, focused primarily on the Spanish-speaking context, Spanish and Portuguese, given that they dominate in terms of the population. But it had findings that are relevant to what we want to look at. And so I like to suggest this as well, in terms of some similar to what you had in Berlin in November, Rolf, something similar here in this part of the world, and so we can be able to spread the message. So thank you.